Hey, everybody, it's Reagan Canope and Ben Bowman. Welcome back to the Oregon Bridge.
I've known Kevin McCarthy since probably before he was elected. The tools you had to work with members, including earmarks and other things, now are used as a big tool against leadership. And probably the most consequential moments were around 9/11. I was outside on the plaza at the Capitol when they hit the Pentagon. I've been involved in campaigns since, I literally was, 13, 15.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening once again. Today, we got a great episode for you. The Honorable Greg Walden is our guest. Served in Congress for 22 years. He was a state representative, a state senator, and also a journalist. He has a degree from the University of Oregon School of Journalism. He did some broadcasting in his younger years that we talked about, did a lot of radio and owned and operated radio stations with his wife for over 2 decades.
He was also almost the third party nominee for Congress at one point, which you'll hear about on this episode.
Great story I like to call how Greg Walden almost got to Congress a different way, because he still obviously ended up in Congress, and just all the details about that story, super fascinating. We really appreciate Congressman Walden coming on to give that. So with that, let's just go right into the episode.
One quick thing that I do want to say is this is a very politics and story focused episode. Like if you listen to the John Taponia episode, that was super policy focused. We're trying to have a balance of both. So our political hacks are getting some fun in this episode. Our policy wonks are getting some fun in the other episodes. But this was a super fun episode with the congressman, and we hope you all enjoy.
The new year has brought some changes to Harangue Long Gary Rudnick PC. For decades, our clients, colleagues, and friends have called us Harangue Long, and now we're making it official. We have shortened our name to Harangue Long PC. We also have moved our Portland office into larger space to accommodate our growing group of legal professionals. Other than that, we're the same as we've always been, a client-focused team with uncommon experience handling matters at the intersection of law, politics, and public policy, with offices in Portland, Eugene, and Salem. To learn how Harangue Long can help you achieve your goals, check out our website at harangue.com. That's HARRANG.com.
Well, welcome back to the podcast. Our guest today, former and longtime Oregon Congressman Greg Walden. Welcome to the podcast.
Good to be with you. Thank you. Good morning.
We appreciate you making the time. So we're going to go back and talk about kind of your background and all this experience that you have. But first, I think that you are pretty close friends with the new Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. And we kind of wanted to ask about your perspective of what went down in terms of how he got to the speakership and the negotiation that he had to make to get there, and then the challenges that he's going to face over the next 2 years. What's kind of your perspective as you were watching that?
Well, I've known Kevin McCarthy since probably before he was elected. He was a staffer. He ran, I think, the district office for Bill Thomas, who was a colleague of mine in the 90s and early 2000s. And Kevin is very focused. He's very driven. He's very smart. He understands politics better than about 90% of the people in the Congress, and understands personal relationships matter. He can probably tell you the names of everybody's kids and their birthdays, and he stays in touch with them. And so he's a very competent politician in the ways I would say that are positive. And he works hard. I can't recite the stat, but I think he was on the road every day in August and went to hundreds of events for Republicans. That's pretty standard fare. And so in the political world, especially in Washington and maybe in Salem, you kind of are appreciative of those who helped get you elected. And he was never ending in that quest, and smart legislatively and pulling people together. And at times where the conference tended to get divided, and it's like you drop down into name calling, they're knuckleheads or they're this or that. He never engaged in that at all, ever. and instead tried to look to the good side of people and bring people together and figure out, okay, how can I understand this person better and find a useful place for him in the family. And so he really focused on that. And I would say he maintained, he had at times Boehner and Jim Jordan fought. As you saw at the outcome of this, Jim Jordan was Kevin McCarthy's biggest fan and put a lot on the line to help get him across. And so Kevin's talented, he's effective, he's a hard worker, and it paid off for him.
That's great. I think it'll be interesting to see how he handles that, because I mean, there's always challenges within the conference. I mean, you helped elect big majorities. He's got a little bit more of a narrow majority. Both bring challenges, I think, ultimately, just different kinds.
Yeah, when I chaired the Republican campaign committee in the 14 and 16 cycles, the thing I get to hang on my wall is we had the biggest back-to-back majorities in the history of the party, including the biggest majority since 1928 at 247 seats. Now, having said all that, that's a job where sometimes you're the bug and sometimes you're the windshield, and I got to be more windshield than bug. But we had a good team, we had good candidates, but the atmospherics really matter, as you both know, in campaigns. But that gave us a 247 majority. Think about this, they have a 222 majority if everybody's well and on board. And so that really empowers a very small group of people to be the swing. Now, I was serving when George Bush was president, and I think we had about a 5-seat majority. And we did some pretty big things, including, I think it was that period we did Medicare Part D, which was very controversial. But we had our president in the White House who, when it's your president and your president calls, it's a little different drill than when you're in the slight majority, but you're in the opposition party still.
Did you have people in the conference? This was pre-2010. So were there people like, the Jim Jordans or the Matt Gaetz or the people who are kind of more comfortable being outside pushing in, or was it just totally different back then?
That's a really good question. And I've thought about this a lot over the years. In the early 2000s, sort of the outliers, I would say, and I don't mean that in a negative way, where we actually had Republicans from states that we can't even spell today, Connecticut. We had 3 Republicans from Connecticut.
Wow.
We had fairly moderate, I'll say, by today's terms, Republicans in New Jersey and New York and New Hampshire. And they were never about throwing a rock. They were more about help me get to yes. If I vote for what you want me to vote for as it is, I won't be back. And so they were more inside the tent trying to figure out how to get to yes. And it could be a pain in the rear, if you're trying to whip them for the approved version of whatever it was. But at the end of the day, they were trying to help. So how's that different than now? My view is that we didn't have social media then. We barely had an internet then. And the tools you had to work with members, including earmarks and other things, now are used as a big tool against leadership. So I can make $1 bazillion on social media by being the most pure person in the conference because I'm the one that didn't sell out to fill in the blank name. And you saw that during this. I mean, I was seeing fundraising requests flying from certain people in the conference that were holding out during that period. They know how to monetize it. You can do it nationally and easily. And for some people, and I won't name names, you feel like it's more important to them to be on the outside and be the focal point and be the social media star than it is to roll up your sleeves and do the legislative work. Not that they don't do some of that, but it's almost like their entire being is about being on the outside. That's hard to work with.
So going back to your background, and one of the things that we'll have covered in the intro is that you did a lot of stuff. I was listening to your farewell speech in the House the other day, and you said that you produced the 11 o'clock news, I think, as a high school student. Is that right?
College, yeah.
College student.
But yes,
you've been a radio host. You've been a campaign and congressional staffer, state rep, state senator, obviously a congressman. What is your favorite job? Either ones I listed or didn't, and why?
Oh, probably being husband and father would be the best, because at the end of the day, that's really what you have in
That's
life.
true.
Something you shouldn't forget. From an occupational standpoint, I don't know. That's a good. I've enjoyed what I've done along the way. I went up to Alaska to go to college, allegedly, and did at Fairbanks, and got hired immediately on the radio and TV station there. They had a big void because all the media types had been hired away to work on the pipeline at very inflated prices. So, Alyeska and Bechtel hired away anybody with media experience to help in that sector. So there was a great opening. I'd grown up in the radio business, got hired right away, and ended up producing and directing their 11 o'clock TV newscast. 6 nights a week, I did weather on Saturdays and a radio shift on Saturdays and Sundays. By the way, one of those overlapped with the other. On Saturday night, I both produced and directed the TV newscast while I was doing the radio show. They got value for their money. The studios were next to each other, so I would track an album on the radio side. So, it's a Moody Blues, Every Good Boy Deserves Favor, or whatever it was, and then let that go for 15 minutes with one stopwatch, go through the studio door into the TV studio and back to producing the TV news. It was kind of a riot, but you got to learn a lot. Anyway, that was wild. I don't know. Serving in Congress was an extraordinary privilege and opportunity. I got to do amazing things, meet incredible people, both here at home as colleagues and presidents, but also overseas as well, and really see the world and understand America from a different lens from time to time. That was really helpful and important, and be a part of some pretty significant legislative efforts over time. I always figured my goal was to get it into law and not to get my name on a bill. So people would say, oh, you only passed X bills or this. They always want these metrics, right? It's like, no, did we get the job done? And the answer was yes, in a lot of areas. So it was great. It was a great privilege to chair the campaign committee and the Energy and Commerce Committee. It was extraordinary to be a member of the leadership team for over a decade. And probably the most consequential moments were around 9/11, because I was outside on the plaza at the Capitol when they hit the Pentagon. So, I mean, it was pretty amazing time.
Wow. So let's rewind a little bit before you get to Congress. So your dad served in the state legislature for 3 terms. Right. How old were you when your dad was in the legislature?
Oh gosh, I was probably 13, something like 13, I guess, because he was elected in 70. Yeah, I would have been 13, 14 when he took out. Actually, if you go back and look in the archives of the Oregonian, I was the kid sitting up in the balcony when Tom McCall's getting sworn in.
No kidding.
Next to my mother with a Pepsi or something. Although this was my first brush with the fake news. I say they said I had a milkshake, and they'd specifically asked me what I was drinking. I told them like a Coke or something. I don't know. They wrote I had a milkshake. Anyway, yeah, it's a picture of me kind of on the rail at 14. Yeah.
So when you're a teenager and dad is in the legislature, were you already into politics at that point, or was this your entry point where you were like young Reagan Knope and you were following dad around and all that stuff?
It was pretty pathetic. Yes. I mean, I had a McCall people. I forget what it was called. I think it was People for Packwood. It was whatever McCall's thing was. We had little vests, and at the county fair, went around and asked people as they pulled into park if we could put the Tom McCall bumper sticker on their car. And I remember he came to the fair, and I got to ride from the gate to the inside in the governor's car, all that sort of stuff. And so I kind of grew up and got interested in it. But my folks were both in radio, and when you're in small market radio, you're just engaged in the community. And so it just was inbred in me, I think, from the beginning that you're involved. And so you go to things and you get interested in what's going on in public affairs, and the two came together. And then I ended up being student body president. And
was your dad was he like a political mentor of yours? Was he around when you started your political career, or what was that relationship like?
Yeah, somewhere. I don't think here. It's in DC. I have a picture of all of us at my kickoff. He was. I ran for the legislature in 19 Elected in 88, in a district he used to be in before he was defeated. In fact, there were 3 of us that cycle that ended up winning House seats in the districts all 3 of our fathers been defeated in. Ray Baum out in LeGrand, me here in Hood River, the Dalles, and then Heidi Reichen, her dad Max, over on the coast, and which was kind of weird. Yeah, in fact, Ray's dad was all set to be elected Speaker of the House. He just forgot to get reelected.
Wait,
my dad had like 3 races. I should go back and actually look at the numbers, but on average, were decided by 17 voters. So against the same guy. So he beat this guy, Wayne Fawbush, in 1974 by about 100 votes. They ran against each other in 76, and he beat my dad by about in the 30s, I think 34 votes. And then they got dad to run again in 78, and he lost by 100 votes again. So I tell people on average, that's 17 voters, 18 voters made the difference.
I was going to say, I think that district, it might be the longest tenured swing district in the state legislature.
Yeah, I came back then, and it's been modified over years with different lines. And the politics have changed dramatically. I used to win Hood River County 66% of the vote. And in my final congressional race, I got 33 or 34.
Wow.
Yeah, it's suburb of Portland now. It's appropriate that it ended up getting redistricted in with Earl. Earl Blumenauer is now my congressman, and we're friends. Now I can pester him about all the deficiencies around here that he needs.
That's good.
What was that? I forgot to look this up. I feel my prep was inadequate now, because I was going to ask you about. So you had 2 terms as majority leader out of your 3. Is that because term limits, were they in effect at that point, or was that?
No. So my freshman term, we weren't in the majority. We took Larry Campbell was the Republican leader. I've been involved in campaigns since, I literally was, 13, 15. And then ended up on a couple of congressional races, Vic Atia's, Roger Martin's gubernatorial races, primary, and then transitioned to Vic's in the general. So I've been around campaigns. Then, of course, Denny Smith, when he took on Al Ullman. And so then I was his press secretary. So I came back and got involved in the races and all when I came back. And so played a role with Larry. They'd recruited me to run in this Democrat district. And so, freshman year, that'd be the 89 session, we were in the minority. And then we worked and got in the majority, and I ran for majority leader and won, and did 2 terms there.
What's it like being, sorry, Ben. I was there as a kid when my dad was serving, so I get some of the stories. What was your experience like serving as majority leader? I mean, what are your kind of major duties that are different than the speaker?
Yeah. So it's interesting, having been there when we were in the minority for 1 term, we'd go up in the conference room, whatever that is on 3rd floor, 359 or whatever it is. And, wow, that's accurate. That would be amazing. And the loudest person got heard, and sort of went around the table. When we took over, Larry and I had to figure out our relationship. It was strong and good, but who does what? And remember, it had been 20 years since Republicans been in the majority. We didn't know how the machine ran. We got a lot of flack for keeping Ramona Kennedy initially. She was clerk of the House, but she pledged to be fair and be independent, and she was. And then
the Republican caucus wanted you to fire her and hire a new clerk, basically.
There were those who thought we should clean house.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And we just decided that she, as long as she was going to play by the rules, which she did, that we didn't have anybody who knew how to run the house.
Right.
And so we caught, how it is. You get your partisans that go, wait a minute, we can't trust her. And remember, she was the former Democrat speaker's daughter-in-law.
That's right.
Yeah. So, I mean,
it's a little touchy.
Yeah. But in the end, she was terrific and called it as she saw it. Because remember, the clerk in the legislature, as I recall, rules on questions parliamentary procedure.
I think that's right. And they're elected by the full House, which I just learned.
Right. Yeah. So we kept Ramona. Larry and I divided up the responsibilities. And my job was to kind of be, well, not to kind of, I ran the caucus, the weekly meetings or daily meetings or however often we met. And part of what I instituted with Bev Clarno as my chief deputy whip was I actually had her keep track of, in order, of who raised their hand to talk. And then we would call on them in order, which brought, more people into the fold other than just the loud talkative ones. And anytime we had bills going to the floor, we had, I think, called blue sheets or something. And if there was a no vote by a Republican in the committee, I wouldn't let a bill go to the floor unless we ran out why. Because I always wanted to have the fight in the family behind closed doors rather than devolve on the floor. And so it was kind of funny. About 3/4 of the time, whoever had voted no was like, "Oh, I was just having a bad day. I was just ticked off." No, I'm fine. Or it was something you needed to go work out. But I wanted to have that discussion in the room. We did planning retreats. We set up sort of priorities, what our goals were, which was really important because later on, when people wanted to take us down a rabbit hole, I could literally go back and say, now, remember when we met, these were our priorities. This one's actually not on there. So, how do we keep our focus? And sometimes you adjust it. Larry was terrific and a real leader. And it was a time we had she is a friend, but was a weak governor, I would say, in Barbara Roberts. Remember Patricia McCaig, the Princess of Darkness, as I think John Dennis called her, kind of ran the show. Barbara would have been very successful if they'd let her out of her office to do walk around, because she's a very nice woman and she could have won over members, I think, if they'd let her out. But they wouldn't let her out to talk to anybody, and Patricia ran the whole thing. But so it was an interesting time. So Larry carried a lot of the burden, I would argue, kind of in the leadership role of the state at the time. He was really a dominant figure, and he worked with Kitzhaber very well. I remember at the end of the probably 93 session, I got invited over about 3 a.m. as we signed he died to go have a toddy with Larry and Kitzhaber. To their credit, they pulled out a list. And at the beginning of the session, unbeknownst to anybody, they had gotten together and they laid out the 3 tiers. What can we agree we're going to get done? What do we think we can get done? And what do we just have to do individually we doubt we'll ever get done? They pulled out that list, and virtually everything on these are things we can agree to and get done list, done. About half the things in the second tier weren't done, and virtually nothing on the. That's, by the way, you have different parties and philosophies. But the fact that they had gotten together and kind of worked that out ahead of time really, I think, spoke to the professional level that Larry and Kitzhaber, who would fight like cats and dogs, but there's that institutional sort of background, I think, and support that's so important for these bodies to really work.
So I was going to ask you a little bit about 96 with Wes Cooley. So you were working from him. His scandal hits, and then I couldn't verify this independently, but the Wikipedia page says you actually threatened to run as an independent. What was kind of going through your mind when you were? Is that what's that?
Before we get into this, can you explain what was actually going on with Wes Cooley? Because I think many of our listeners will not be super familiar.
That's a good point. Thank you, Ben.
Right. Yeah, so Wes Cooley had moved up from California, ran for the state Senate. Now here's the whole back, how deep you want to go story. So Wayne Fawbush is the guy who beat my father twice for state rep in the 70s. Ken Jernstead was state senator. He retires. Wayne moves up to run for the state Senate, and I run for the state House seat. Okay, I was going to run against Wayne, and then Ken retired. So Wayne, of course, moved up. He runs against Bill Bellamy and wins the Senate seat. I run against Carolyn Wood, a business leader from the Dows, and win. So we're in together. Then Phil Kiesling, Secretary of State, redraws all the lines, but moreover, repairs the districts.
Oh, interesting.
So Wayne's district, rather than going into Bend, now goes out to John Day and Hood River in the Dalles. So
just got way redder.
Way redder. And I've never known why he did that, but he did that. And it may have made sense. I don't, whatever. Phil's a Democrat and pretty independent thinker. And, he did it. So then this guy that moves up from California named Wes Cooley, who had a vitamin factory of some stature in alfalfa, and cattle rancher, although his neighbors would tell you his cattle were in really sad shape, and I'm not making that up. He files to run against Fawbush. And there's a lot of other background, but I end up, because I'm out, helping on Wes's campaign as a consultant. And no, wait a minute, is that the one I did? I helped on his congressional. He runs against Fawbush. No, I wasn't involved in that one. And it comes out that maybe he doesn't quite live in the district, but he moved a trailer and board. Still had a California driver's license, things like that. But he wins and beats Wayne. All right. Then Bob Smith announces he's not going to run. And
for Congressional District 2. Correct.
Thank you. And then and Wes announces, and he's one of a collection from Medford, Central Oregon. And so Bob says, "Can you help me? Can you help, Wes? We got to hold this seat." And so I end up consulting for Wes in his primary. And I said, basically, everybody else is Southern Oregon. You ought to just focus on Central and Eastern Oregon in the primary. You're a Cal guy, you're former, county president of the Farm Bureau, you're all these things. So he did, and he won. And then more stuff began to come out on Wes. And anyway, that campaign ended. He won. He got elected to Congress. Well, then everything comes out, that his wife, maybe or maybe wasn't his wife. Her husband had been a military, I think he was Air Force, died. She was getting widow's benefits, but if she remarried, then she'd be, they're fraud. So were they married or not? I mean, it's just one thing after another. And that he claimed that he had fought in North Korea, but the records were destroyed. My favorite, I tell this story a lot, when accosted by the Oregonian about this fact that, could he really prove this? He said, well, our records were burned, and there was that big fire, in the South where all the veterans' records were destroyed. Yeah. And he said, if my old Sergeant Poppy were still alive, he could verify this. Well, by God, the Oregonian put an investigative reporter on it.
Oh, no.
They found Sergeant Poppy in a single-wide trailer in the desert in Arizona. And they ran a front page picture of this old grizzled up guy with I think he had a T-shirt on, holding the screen door open, leaning out, going, "I know Wes Cooley." And you can tell Wes Cooley, he's a GD liar.
No.
If you're going to cite a source that you think is dead, you got to confirm that.
Oh, man.
Yeah, that was front page. And so anyway, this thing's coming apart. It seems Mike Dugan is going to be the Democrat nominee out of
Deschutes. He became the Deschutes DA later, I think.
He was the Deschutes DA.
Oh, at the time. Okay.
And had a big family presence from Klamath Falls. I think they'd been in the car business down there. So he's in the rock solid guy. His wife went on to be in the legislature.
Judy Siegler.
Yeah, exactly. So he's running, and and this is after the filing deadline. So nobody can get in on the Republican side. Wes is the only one. And so he wins the primary. All this is unfolding. It's just, you can go look up the history. It's nasty, as you believe. And we get to the convention, the Republican convention in June in La Grande. And Wes is there, and this thing's coming apart. And everybody thinks Wes is going to do what most people would do, which would be apologize and say, "I'm really sorry. I need to go straighten out my life. I'm going to step down." Oh, no.
No.
He gave everybody the middle finger. And something to the effect, if you think I was married when I wasn't, that's your problem, blah, 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 blah. I mean, he just doubled down. He went after him. And my wife and our young son, we were camping out in Wallowa. And some of my supporters had been, because I knew a lot of these people had been at the convention. And Camille Ukari from Hood River had been there. Anyway, so we got to talking. It's like, we're going to lose this seat. And he won't give up the nomination. So what the hell do we do? So we formed a third party. by we had double the number of signatures in about 3 weeks. And I said to Bob Smith, if you're going to do anything, let me know. But otherwise, I'm going to go do this. No, I'm done. You go. And sent me $500, and off we went to the races.
Wow.
And so there's enormous media attention, of course, because nobody does this stuff.
At the time, did you think you could win, or were you just trying to prevent him from winning, or what was the theory of the case here?
I thought I could win. I thought I could win. Or I wouldn't have done it. And so we go off down the road, and within about 3 weeks, I think, we had double the number of signatures needed to form this third party. And Bill Thorndike out of Medford. God, who was the other co-chair? Anyway, Felix Tomlinson from here, Hood River. They were the co-chairs of the 2nd Congressional District Party.
That's a great name.
Guess who was going to be the nominee? So we were raising money. We were doing all these things. And so it's going down. And I had Mark Hatfield and Slade Gordon, 2 U.S. senators, Oregon and Washington, agreed to host a big fundraiser for me the first part of August in D.C.
No kidding.
Association of Broadcasters. And I think we'd raised $100,000, which is a lot of money, and had more coming in. I mean, we were really going.
Wow.
And Newt Gingrich, my friend, and he is, told Bob that if they could get Wes out of the race, that he would make Bob chairman of the Ag Committee if Bob would run it. So I'm literally sitting in the NAB office when all this goes down, and I hear about it. And I called Senator Hatfield, and I'm just a nobody from nowhere, we're going, this is big league stuff. And I said, so here's what's happening. And Bob was in DC. I said, so here's what's going down. What do you want to do? What should I do? He said, well, did Bob committee and support you? I said, well, yeah, he sent me $500 and all, but things have changed. He said, well, I'll be there. And he and Slade left the Senate floor. It was actually an appropriations bill on the floor. And they came down, we did the event. And then things began to unfold. And there was a lot of pressure to get Wes out. And on the final day, you could actually withdraw and get your name off the ballot. It was during the convention, the Republican convention down in, I'll say San Diego, maybe. It was in California. Mm-hmm. And they finally get Wes to sign the document to withdraw. And so now Republicans will have a chance to pick somebody. And I pursued that for a time being until I realized it really is a professional sport. And, it was made pretty clear Bob was going to run for it as well. And I never tend to run against Bob, but I always thought Bob was going to support me too. But, things happen.
Yeah. And
so this thing's going down, and we get to the Deschutes County Central Committee. In the meantime, I flew back from Washington. There was a press report that Wes said that he would ride the death train, whatever that means, quote, make sure that I was never elected.
Oh, my goodness.
I was in the state Senate at that point, filling out, by the way, a 2-year term that was created because of his vacancy to go to the Congress. Back to our small world story. And so I actually let the state police know, because this guy had kind of an interesting history. So anyway, nothing ever materialized out of that. So we get to the Deschutes County Central Committee, but that threat's kind of lingering out there. And so I'm actually kind of looking around, Wes lives in that area. I announced that Bob and I got together before that. And I was not the happiest camper because I'd kind of wasted 9 months of my life, but it did help put pressure on. And I said, I'm done. I never wanted to run against the Republican Party. We were just going to lose the seat. And I endorsed Bob, and I left. And we went camping, whatever. He ended up playing it out, and it got clear down to the Central Committee meeting in Medford. And Perry Atkinson was also running. Perry had just about beaten Wes in the primary. He'd run before, and he was the state party vice chair. I think he was chair of the Jackson County Republicans, and it's his committee.
Is he related to Jason?
Would be his father.
Yep. Okay.
So it gets down to to the Jackson County Central Committee, and the result of that's going to determine who the nominee is. And it's Perry Central Committee. Now, I'm not there, but I've heard the story that Bob finally just gave up and went home, said, well, this is over that evening. But as fate would have it, apparently the Atkinson folks nominated one too many delegates on their slate, split the vote, and Bob won.
Oh my God.
Went on to beat Mike Dugan. So then in December of 1997, I'm in a bank board meeting. We bought 2 other radio stations. I'm headed down a different path. Bob, well, he pages me. I'll tell you what a pager historical website. He goes off and I call him and he said, in an hour, I'm announcing I'm not running again. I'm going to he's now chairman of the Ag Committee. He's been the majority, first time in 14 years. He said, I'm going to publicly endorse you to replace me. Let me know what you decide. And I said, are you okay? Did something happen? It's like, what the hell? And I remember coming back here to Hood River into my wife's little office in our radio station and said, this is weird. Look what just happened. Don't worry, dear. I'm not going to do that. We just bought these stations. I'm going to run the ones in the Dow. She's going to run the ones in Hood River. And well, the rest is history. So I remember calling Gordon Smith and saying, so why did you run twice for the United States Senate in the same calendar year? He's probably the only person that's ever done that, by the way. And he said, because I didn't want to go through life wondering what if. And I talked to my old colleague, who's about as hardcore political operative as I know, Paul Phillips.
Pac West.
And I said, so Paul, what do you think about this? He's so straight to the point. He goes, let me get this right. Popular Republican congressman endorses you in Republican primary in Republican district. What are you waiting for?
That's fair question.
It was. So anyway, so I ended up running, and then
did you
Perry, well, but wait, it gets better. Perry got in.
Okay.
So him and Wes Cooley decides he's going to run.
He's back on the death train.
So I got in early February of 98. I was down, I think, 9 points. I had Bob Moore do a poll. I was down 9 points.
To who? To Perry?
Perry, yeah. I was down 9. Had nothing in the bank. We raised $450,000 between then and May 18th primary, and I won by 22, 55, 33. We held West to 9, and there was a 4th candidate. And the rest was history. But I go back to close this little long conversation that I'm convinced that if Wayne Fawbush hadn't have beaten my dad back in 1976, I would never have been in Congress, because
wow.
run again. How it's kind of funny how that works, right? So for those who think they can plot their political future, think again.
Yeah. Before Ben asks the next question, I keep telling everybody, because I saw this on social media. So the newly appointed senator from Nebraska is the former governor of Nebraska, who just ended his term, Pete Ricketts. Yep. And he ran for U.S. Senate in Nebraska in 2006 and got his clock cleaned by Ben Nelson. And the tweet said, the best strategy in politics is just run until you win.
There is that. Well, back to Newt Gingrich ran, I think, 3 times before he got elected. I know a lot of members that have run a couple of times, and some who've been defeated and came back. So
Tina Kotek lost her first legislative race. Tom McCall lost his first congressional race before he got. A lot of people lose first.
Abe Lincoln. We heard about. We heard our last podcast was or maybe the last episode we posted was Rick Metzger talking about how Kate Brown and Peter Courtney battled it out in their Senate conference for the presidency of the state Senate. So, and she ends up becoming governor.
Yeah.
So, I think, so it says in 2010, you led John Boehner's quote transition team. I assume this is like the equivalent of a presidential transition, but it was from Nancy Pelosi to John Boehner. So A, what was that experience like? And B, what is Kevin McCarthy doing right now? I'm assuming he's sort of in the middle of this. What is the process?
Yeah. So it was, I was deputy chairman of the NRCC under Pete Sessions in 2009 and 10. We took the majority, picked up 63 seats, I think 54 net, and got the majority back. But I'd never really played a role in leadership at all. I mean, we were busy raising our son, the business. I was back every week. So this was sort of a breakthrough moment for me. And I don't know why Boehner picked me to do it, but he did. And he and Eric Cantor, who was the whip at the time, and they said, we want you to lead the transition. And I said, well, what does that mean? And they said, well, to do exactly as you described. So I said, well, how much flexibility do I have? Who do I report to? All those sorts of things. And so they said, no, you go put it together and we'll work with you on it. But we want you to lead it. The most awkward part was I couldn't say anything ahead of time, but I've never not been like hosting the Republican campaign party in Medford. And I knew I wasn't going to be there because he said, you got to be here election night because we start the next day. And so I said, okay, let me think that through. So I did. And we put together a video connection into Medford. Now, remember, this is 2010. You didn't have Zoom. It was a little bit. I got a great picture somebody took of Boehner and I in his hotel room. We'd gone back in the I'll say bedroom and had a laptop set up. And we're both poised over the laptop into the Medford party. I said, now I can explain why I'm not there. Ladies and gentlemen, the next Speaker of the House, John Boehner.
Nice.
So we had no resources to do this, no budget, no staff. So I had to rob staff and budget. My wife was back with me, so we just pretended it was our small business. And literally the two of us went to work on it. We grabbed my personal office staff and some others. And then, of course, the Boehner's office, they had a press guy, Brendan Buck, that worked closely with us, and his team, Barry Jackson and others. And so I'll tell you one really, I think, interesting story. We were down at HC8 in the Capitol. Speaker Pelosi had graciously set that up ahead of time and made the full resources of the House available to us. So I could call and say, I need 3 desks, 2 dividers, and they were there. So Ed Cassidy, who worked for Boehner, told the story of that morning after the election. We'd gone in the room. I wasn't there at the time, but there's a little placard holder outside on each of those doors. And I created the name, Office of GOP Transition, Greg Walden, Chairman. Why not? We'd slipped it in. And Ed told the story coming around the hallway the other way, and Speaker Pelosi and her entourage were dodging the press, basically, coming through the basement. And he said she came around the corner, saw that placard out of the corner of her eye, stopped, turned, read it, and then continued on her way. And to me, that is how transitions of power should happen. She was very cooperative, but it was, to me, that acknowledgement moment of, it's real.
I guess I'm out. Yeah.
I'm out. And she was very gracious about it all. And we were going along our way. I formed 3 committees. We revamped some of the rules of the House, some of the actions of the House. My biggest probably accomplishment out of all that, being a West Coast member, was to convince the leadership that unless we're going to war, we ought to be able to go away at a set time on the go away day. In other words, it's either Thursday or Friday that you finish up business. We ought to be able to leave by 3:30. Because if you're coming to the West Coast, you don't have options after that. Mm-hmm. And then, it's real easy if you're in, if you're my friend Steny Hoyer in Maryland, yeah. I'll tell you a story on him. But so we did. And I said, and let's stop having votes on the House floor before 1:30. Because the committees meet at 10, you have witnesses, and then you interrupt them with votes on the floor and you can't get your business done. And oh, by the way, noon, a lot of members, both sides are doing fundraising lunches. So let's get those in. And the same in the evening, leave the dinner hour sort of protected. And so they did all that. One day on the House floor, Steny Hoyer came up to me and he said, I just want you to know, 434 people like your schedule better than mine. I said, if you want to lower the frustration level of all offices and especially schedulers, just put some certainty in the schedule. And they did, and it worked really well. They kind of got away from it a bit. Hopefully they'll come back.
So you served with Speaker Dennis Haser, Speaker Pelosi, Hasser, I'm sorry, Speaker Pelosi, Speaker Boehner, and then you served with McCarthy, but not while he was Speaker.
Right.
Who
Speaker
did
Ryan.
you? Oh yes, and that's right. I didn't write down Paul Ryan. Yep. Who were you closest to Boehner, or who were you closest to out of those groups?
Probably Boehner, and Paul Ryan and I came in together in the class of '98. In fact, we were two of the last three on the Republican side. The only remainder is Mike Simpson from Idaho. And so Paul and I were very close too. But I just served longer. I'll say longer with Boehner as Speaker, probably, and did more. But Paul and I were close as well. Hastert, I just wasn't, up in the leadership and didn't have time to go do a lot of the things I did later in my career. And so I knew Denny well. Trying to think, he was the first one. The funny story on that. So I get elected in '98. Clinton's in the White House. We come back to D.C. for our orientation, and we go in the big Cannon Caucus room, and I'm a newbie, and of course I'm going to support the Speaker Gingrich. Heck, he'd been out here, he'd been to Hood River, we did events, he's Speaker, and he announces he's done his job by keeping us the majority. Now it's time for somebody else, and leaves. And you're like,
that was a surprise. You guys were expecting to elect Gingrich?
Well, I was probably not well informed. They'd had it the prior conferences. Remember, he was only there 4 years, which is pretty amazing. Yeah. And he could read the writing on the wall that he didn't have votes, and it's time to go. So Bob Livingston runs for Speaker. He's the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, Louisiana. And we all elect Bob Livingston, and we do the freshman member dinner and do all this stuff. And then they send the incoming members home. And then Bob Livingston, it turns out, might have had a little affair, like Bill Clinton had an affair. And Bob Livingston goes to the House floor, which tells you, and announces that he's going to resign, and he challenges Bill Clinton to do the same. And of course, I'm sure Bill Clinton just laughed. So Livingston steps down. By the way, that's when they reached way down in the hierarchy to Denny Hastert, who was chief deputy whip, to make him the Republican nominee for Speaker. Now, here's the funny part. I don't think I was alone. I don't think they ever reached out to the incoming freshman class to ask us our opinion or seek our vote. So we learned about it on TV or radio.
Oh, my goodness.
Our new nominee for Speaker wasn't the one we'd voted for. It was some other guy.
Wow. And then my other question was president. So you served tail end of Clinton, and then Obama, George W. Bush, and Trump. What were your working relationships like with the different presidents?
That's a really good question. Clinton was really a very effective politician in a lot of ways. I was down at the White House multiple times in working meetings at the upper second level, the family living quarters level, on some issues. He had us down. I remember taking our son to one of the recordings of the radio. You remember the presidents would do that Saturday weekly radio address. Yep. We stood in the Oval Office while he recorded it. And then I got the White House give me have him autograph a photo of himself to my son's third grade teacher, who I knew was a big Democrat, to say, please excuse Anthony for missing class.
That's great.
That's cool.
But he was really very effective, and man, he owned you when he looked at you. He owned you, and you knew it. I remember running into him when Hillary was Secretary of State down at the State Department at a Kennedy Center Honors dinner, and I was leading the transition at the time. And I went over we kind of bumped into each other, and I said, I reminded him who I was. He goes, oh, I know who you are. I was so pleased to see that John Boehner asked you to lead that transition. You're going to do it. It's like, how the hell?
That's a great Bill Clinton, by the way.
That
major kudos.
So good at this stuff. George W. Bush, I spent a lot of time with as president. He was terrific to work with, he and his team. Down at the White House regularly. Obama, just the opposite. And Democrats would tell you this too. He had a terrible legislative affairs office. Nobody knew anybody. He was always the smartest guy in the room and didn't really need you. I remember when we were in a government shutdown, he wanted the whole Republican conference to come to the White House. And Boehner rightly said, we're not doing that. We'll come down as leadership team. So we pile in a bus and get escorted down. We go in, we meet with him in the Roosevelt room. And Eric Cantor and Paul Ryan and me and Speaker and a few other leadership and some key staff. And they're laying out a plan they'd hatched to try and reach a compromise, reopen the government. And it was actually pretty reasonable. And Eric Cantor had written it out, and he reads from it and says to the president, here's what we're proposing, blah, blah, blah. And the president just keeps going on, just, you know. And Paul Ryan literally stands up at the table and leans over and says, Mr. President, you're about to miss your moment. It's like, what are you talking about? We came down here with a serious proposal. Da, 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 da. And he said, what proposal? The one Eric Cantor presented. He hadn't even heard it. Just hadn't heard it. So anyway, he going to take that under advisement. He says, okay, here's what we're going to say. You're going to go out to press and back up the hill. You're going to say that the president is interested in this and the president's going to do this and that, talking about himself. And I mean, it's just like, we did because we thought there was a plan. Remember, he and Boehner had an agreement to do major entitlement reform. And then, according to Boehner, Obama walked from it.
Interesting.
And this continued, but that's Obama. But
during the Obama years, Biden was famously the congressional emissary from that White House. Were you interacting with him at all?
No, I wasn't. Paul did a lot, which was ironic since they would run against each other in the vice presidential.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And Biden was a legislator. Obama never was. You know, he was in office, but he wasn't a legislator. And so I remember famously there was this Washington Post story about how the Obama administration had horrible legislative affairs team. So they decided to address it. And they pulled together a lunch of the Republican committee chairs and all. Now, I was not a chair at that time, but a good friend of mine who was recounted that he gets down there and he might have been like chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. So pretty big committee. He's seated, and whoever this is that's organized this sits next to him and says, hi, I'm, Joe Smith. Who are you? Like, no. Ways and Means Committee, and you invited me here. I mean, it's like they would never, he never said anything.
Get this guy a Facebook so he can see who these people are.
Did that say it all? And Democrats would say the same thing. They'd say, "Oh yeah, we don't have any relationship down there either." They were just as upset. So it wasn't a partisan thing; it's just bad management.
And then Trump takes office and everything gets back to normal and high functionality and great relations.
Now I was chairing the Energy and Commerce Committee, so that may have been part of why I was in the White House so much. But I was around the president a lot and his team. And actually, in person, he was very engaging. But occasionally, you had to go squirrel, and get him refocused because he just goes. But he could be very cordial, and he could be a real more difficult personality to deal with. But I remember after we passed the House version of that healthcare bill that we got reamed on because we never could get to conference and make it better. But thank you, John McCain. But they take us all down to the White House because anyway, so we go in and they peel me and several of the leaders off into the Oval. And this staff person goes, "You're number 4. It's like, number 4? Yeah, you're going to speak in the Rose Garden.
Wow.
The vice president, the speaker, and then like me. Okay, glad I could. So we roll out of the Oval into the Rose Garden, and they got us all arrayed around the podium, and then all the members are back behind, and they go through it, and it's really funny because this just tells you the differences in personality. So my friend Mike Pence gets up, vice president, big, huge Jumbotron teleprompter, and he reads it flawlessly because he's a former broadcaster. He just reads it flawlessly, and it's right on message and on point. And then the Jumbotrons go dark, and the president comes up. It's like, hold on, who knows where this is going? Yeah, and then I think it was Paul Ryan, and then I think me.
That's amazing.
And that was the only time you were ever invited to speak from the White House.
No, actually, from the Rose Garden. No, they'd have me down for various events.
Okay.
Surprise medical billing, which actually we got into law in a bipartisan way. The Support Act, which dealt with fentanyl and all the drug-related issues around that. The thing I learned was if I was invited down, I needed to be ready to speak because the president was very engaging there. He'd say, Ben, come on out here. Say a few words. And so I was always on guard for that because he, yeah.
So, Congressman, we're running up on time here. So we have one last kind of maybe bigger question, which is you have been basically the most prominent Republican politician in Oregon for most of your tenure, in part because you were very successful in DC, but also in part because there wasn't a lot going on in Oregon in terms of Republicans.
I have this, just break in with this stat, Ben. I wrote that from 2012 to 2020, the Oregon congressional delegation never changed. Bonamici won, and then the congressional delegation was solidified for 8 years. It didn't change. There was no one who was replaced in that time. So it was very stationary for a little while.
So and during this time, I remember, I don't know how serious this ever was, but your name would often come up in some reporting about, maybe this is the time Greg Walden's going to run for governor, or maybe he's going to run for one of the Senate seats. And of course, various different candidates of more conservative to more moderate have tried and almost always lose by about the same margin. My fun fact on that is that Jo Rae Perkins won by a slightly smaller margin than Monica Webby did when she ran against Jeff Merkley. So the question for you is, what is your theory of what's gone wrong in the Oregon Republican Party? Why has it been so hard for the party to win at the statewide level in Oregon?
I'm not so sure that it's what's gone wrong with the Republican Party, but voter registration plays an enormous and probably the most important impact on election results. And Oregon has just moved to the left and blue. I mean, you can look at every wave election, whether it's Congress, whether it's president, and it just sort of peters out when it gets past Burns. And that's Washington too. If you look at, I think our big sweep in 2010, Jamie
McLeod-Skinner.
No, Jamie Herrera Butler.
Herrera Butler. Yeah.
I was going to my former phone. And I think she was the only Republican on the west side of the Cascades or the Sierras that won. And so it's a coastal thing. Now, are there things we could do better? Yes. And there always are. But it's hard. And I really think that if you want to look for successful models for statewide candidates, you need to look at Larry Hogan in Maryland. You need to look at Charlie
Baker, yeah.
In Massachusetts, John Sununu in New Hampshire. There are models for statewide electeds. I mean, Oregon is only exceeded by Washington State in going longer without a Republican governor. And that's only by 2 years, John Spellman, Vicatia. And so we haven't been able to unlock that model yet. And if you look at it, it's generally a little more socially moderate, fiscally reasonable candidate for a Republican, I would argue. I also think at its core, Oregon has become a very business unfriendly state. And as a result, where some of these states are still into wanting to grow and develop economically, I'm not convinced Oregon is. And so you don't have much diversity in sort of medium to large size businesses. We can name 2 or 3, and you stop naming after Nike, Intel, and maybe Columbia Sportswear. It gets pretty thin. And there's been so much pressure to, kill off the timber industry and all of that, it's not the same as the, Research Triangle in North Carolina, let's say, or the, up in Massachusetts, what you can appeal to there. I think we've got to get our act together better here, whether you're Republican or Democrat, because when businesses leave, they take their intellectual capital and their financial capital with them, and they generally don't issue a press release. They just leave. And I know a lot of business leaders who I wish were still living in Oregon, who now live in Idaho, Nevada, pick a state, and that's not healthy in the long run for the state. And yet it seems to produce plenty of revenue off those who remain. But the more you tilt toward a really progressive income tax as your sole source, and you don't somehow nurture that underneath with good, strong business growth, I think you have a problem. It's a really competitive country when it comes to big business investment, and hopefully we'll see a change.
Well, to wrap up, I wanted the two things I think of when someone says Greg Walden. First, of course, Oregon's Republican congressman, because for most of my developing life, you were the only Republican figure in DC for Oregon. But the second one is from what actually I don't think is a very good profile of you in Politico, but it contains my favorite quote you've ever given, I think, which is I'm a chairman in exile, dude. Which I just thought was a great quote. So I didn't know if you had anything else that you wanted to share, but I was just going to wrap with that, because I thought it was fun.
Yeah, that I think they were poking me about running for something else, and anyway, I was or I was former chairman of Energy and Commerce, and I think that was with Drazan. But anyway, no, the only thing I'd kind of close with is after the election, my successor, who I'm a big fan of, Cliff Bentz, pulls me aside, and he's pretty dry and quiet. He had this little Cheshire cat grin, and he says, "I just want you to know what I'm telling people about you." It's like, what are you telling them? He said, "Well, I'm just telling them you were in the delegation for 22 years and never added a Republican. I've been in office 2 years and I've doubled." So, of course, in January, I pinged him and I said, "Cliff, I want you to know what I'm saying about you." I said, 22 years in the Congress, we always elected our speaker on the first ballot.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap it. Thank you, Congressman Walden. You've been so gracious with your time. We really appreciate it, and we hope you come back sometime and share some more great stories from the White House or wherever.
Yeah, there are a few out there.
Thank you, Congressman.
I really enjoyed it. Yeah, good luck, you guys. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.